Good afternoon. Welcome to the Healthy Indoors Live Show. I'm your host, Bob Krell, publisher and founder of Healthy Indoors Magazine. Today's show is one we've been thinking about for a long time. We're really excited to do it. We're going to take on some topics that I think many people in the industry shy away from. Not our guests, though, however. So our first guest has a long-standing commitment to the study of indoor environments and the dynamic interaction between occupants, contaminant sources, and building materials and systems. He is a certified industrial hygienist and a professional engineer and president of Indoor Environmental Engineering, an IAQ consulting firm based in San Francisco, California. Please welcome Bud Offermann.
Hey,
how are you, Bud?
Hey, very good. Pleased to be on.
Our next guest is currently a professor and researcher in the Environmental Science and Engineering Department's I'm going to mispronounce this, Gilling School of Global Public Health at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. He was also president of the International Society of Indoor Air Quality and Climate from 2014 through 2016 and was named a fellow in 2011. Please welcome Dr. Glenn Morrison.
Hi.
Hey. And last but not least, finally, since it's April 15th, we have a representative from IRS, not the IRS, but Insurance Restoration Specialists and their Infection Control Technologies Division. He has over 20 years of professional experience in handling event-driven hazardous materials and biological response actions for industrial, commercial, and residential properties. He currently sits on the board of directors as the president of the American Biorecovery Association. Please welcome Thomas Licker.
Hey, Thomas Licker.
How are you? So everybody, great to see you guys here today. It's an interesting topic. Would you not agree? Several years ago, Glenn authored an editorial piece in Indoor Air that raised a lot of questions about pseudoscience and some snake oil issues. And more recently, Bud authored a paper that he put out last fall about the snake oil getting into the COVID-19 market. So, with that in mind, do you all feel that there's a big issue in this industry?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I got to say this, the reason I wrote that piece was, the kids, right? The schools, the teachers, and to be sold devices that really don't maybe do much or maybe actually do harm is really a disgrace. And so I need to get the message out, and I'm glad you have us on here, Bob, to help us get this message out. I just wanted to share this with you. This was an open letter by Marwa Zatari. She just put it out. I'm going to send it to you, Bob. I don't know if you put stuff up on your website.
We do. After the show, we'll have it up on the website post show, so it'll be available.
But this is an open letter, kind of like Lydia Moroska did on small airborne aerosols of SARS-CoV-2. It's an open letter signed by a bunch of very distinguished scientists, and it's about open letter to address the use of electronic air cleaning equipment in buildings. And to say the least, they're not recommending these devices stay with the tried and true HEPA filters and stuff like that. So I just wanted to get that in.
I mean that does raise an interesting prospect here, because it's the question that we posed for today's show is the problem snake oil products, or is the problem snake oil salesmen? And I would question, or is it a combination of both? That we're dealing with here, and not just for COVID, but in general in the IAQ industry. We've had years and years. We all of us have had these conversations, right, at conferences and amongst all the people in the industry. Oh, things are crazy. Things shouldn't be done this way. But have we really offered any resolution to that?
Yeah, I don't think that what I see is in the industry from a contractor's point of view is that I get hit over the head with every type of gadget technology. This is going to be the latest and greatest thing. We tried this with NASA. I hear all these marketing tips that are out there, and to the naive that don't research the product thoroughly before they incorporate it into their scopes of work, you really, some of this stuff, not even that, I think this is salesmen out there that really truly believe in this product because they're naive to a lot of things. And a lot of times they're not scientists themselves, or they don't challenge the efficacy criteria or the science behind the product. They take it as face value, and they're out there trying to push it because, let's face it, everybody's trying to make money on something out there. And in times like COVID, or when you have a pandemic, we see it time and time again. Or even, we had the enterovirus D68 not too long ago. You see these people come out of the woodwork, whether it be the manufacturers, and we all know this, or the contractors that are promising X, Y, Z, and we'll sterilize your property. We've seen, we'll fog your house for $150 on a sign on the side of the road. So, how do we curtail that as an industry, and how do we bring science into the mechanisms of contracting work, or back into the relationship with the manatory?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that, what you're saying there, Tom.
Oh, tell me about it.
I mean, what, and you touched on the issue of, I think many practitioners and maybe consultants, are unwittingly providing solutions or purported solutions that they believe will work. I think part of the solutions that may fall under the snake oil category are, those that are not voluntarily, selling snake oil. They actually think they're providing a good service. So
a better metaphor than maybe the snake oil salesman, although I like that one. I thought that was a good hook for my opinion piece. But another one is the emperor has no clothes. And so if you know that little child's story, some weavers weave some invisible clothes for the emperor, right? And everyone around him that are kind of fawning up to him, they're like, "Oh yeah, those are the most beautiful clothes." So, like you're saying, even the sales reps for these products, they might actually believe it works and everything. And in the emperor's has no clothes fable, it was a young child that said, "Wait a minute, he's got no clothes on." So, yeah.
What's interesting is I don't think anything has changed. I mean, we've been in the industry a long time. For me, since the mid '80s, but I know you're in the same time frame. Thomas, I'm not really sure how long you've been there, but the reality is we've been having this discussion since back in the the late '80s, early '90s, and it seems like we're still having this conversation here in 2021, which is crazy. But Glenn, I want to direct a question to you. Your 1999 dissertation was on ozone, right? And in the 1990s, there was a lot of controversy around ozone and the company Alpine Air and its founder Bill Converse. And it seems like a lot of people came out to fight snake oil products back in the 1990s. But what's happened since then?
I don't know. I mean, there was sort of a convergence of questions surrounding indoor ozone and some chemistry that was going on back then that actually made some waves. In particular, just the fact that some of these products were generating ozone at levels indoors that were significantly above outdoor standards was enough to give everybody pause. And it was a bit of a I don't know, it was a more public battle in the sense that there were lawsuits, and it sort of pushed back on that question. And so ozone, if getting ozone generated, selling something as an ozone generator to improve indoor air quality is much less common now. I think they use different terms, of course. They use ion generators or something else, right? That may, as a side effect, generate ozone. But I don't know. I'd say that there's just as much concern at the academic scale that there's these products out there, but there's also a bit of distance, because as academics look at a product, they say, well, this can't work. I don't understand why this is even being sold, and kind of stop there. It's not it's not really the next level of the next thing we do. That's not what we do unless we specifically are researching those devices. But there are a lot of really good people in academia that have come out about that, and that's Bud's mention of Marwa's recent paper is great. And Bud's paper, and there's several others out there that are pushing right now because of the pandemic. I mean, I could go on and on, but I'd say I don't know why it's a little different now, why there's this interval of some quiet. Yeah.
I mean, because of late, there's a lot of rumbling in the industry about, pro and con bipolar ionization, and not just to pick on that, in schools buying them, obviously that's, part of that paper that you just mentioned. Do these products work? I mean, are they just being sold to the wrong markets? Or, I mean, or is there an installation problem or an application problem? Like sometimes with UVC, very effective, radiating a surface, but maybe on a 500 foot per minute airstream, not so effective.
Right.
Who wants to?
Who wants to jump on that?
I'll just say that it's something that Bud and I have talked about. But in general, products that add something to air are bad. I mean, I shouldn't say are necessarily bad, or should be of concern. You always want to take things out of air. That's one clear, simple way of looking at things. And so if you're adding ions, if you're adding ozone, if you're acting active oxygen, adding fragrance, any of these things has consequences, and you shouldn't ever add. So do ionizers work? Ionizers can work. So there's a thread of truth to that, right? So that you ionize, you generate ions, they attach to particles. The particles then are more easily removed by filtration or other means. Yes, that can work.
Yeah, and that's right. Glenn's entirely right. I was fortunate enough when I was a scientist at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory to be able to test some ionizers back in the early days. We're talking the 80s now. And ionizers can charge particles, and it can increase deposition onto filters, but also onto what else? Everything else.
Exactly.
The walls, your skin, your respiratory tract, all these things. And I gotta just affirm or chime in with what Glenn said. These additive devices, whatever you're adding, ions, ozone, people are spraying hydrogen peroxide in the air. That's a very high bar to prove, like from a precautionary principle, that there's no harm being done, right? It's not simply saying, putting a device in a chamber and showing that it removes some particles, because you're adding something. So besides removing particles, what are you creating and stuff like that. So at any rate, Glenn, continue.
Well, no, that's all I was going to say is that yes, they work. However, they don't work that well when they're operating at a safe level, not generating much ozone. And from what we can tell from the existing actual, decent studies, and there's no reason to go to something like that when you already have perfectly useful alternatives out there that are well vetted, have been around forever. I'd like to say I'm going to speculate something. For one thing, you have snake oil, right? So there's companies that are going to try to sell things because they want to set themselves apart and sell something. But I think they work in this case, especially during the pandemic, because you have a very unusual and very dangerous new threat. And so how do you deal with that? Well, you put in a very unusual new technology, and that sets better with people, I think, than using, we have tried and true technology that should take care of that. That's really a new threat, but that's a hypothesis.
I mean, that same argument could be made for, why people were reluctant to wear masks, or, getting misinformation on that too.
Sure.
And that's pretty tried and true technology too, right?
Right. The simplest approach, the simplest behavioral approaches are the most effective approaches. Right.
Bud, you mentioned on chamber studies too, that's the other problem, I think, is, things in a controlled chamber study, any type of research, right? In a controlled environment, you control the amount of variables, and you can get results that are not necessarily replicatable in the field, right?
Yeah, so you want to know what the cheat list is? You want to cheat? um, take an air cleaner and put it in a very small box, and watch how fast the particles go. Take an ionizer and put it an inch away from a petri dish with bacteria in it for a long period of time. All these things are kind of cheats. And, where is the Federal Trade Commission? All right, I get it. The last administration probably wasn't that wasn't going to happen. But where are they now? I think they need to get on board here. And also there's a lot of appropriation of a couple organizations. One is the FDA, and the FDA had back in March, so right at the start of the pandemic, came out with like an emergency guideline approval of disinfection equipment for surfaces or air. And it simply said you had to show a 4-log reduction. That's it. So again, you can take out an air cleaner, put it in a very small box, run it for like a week if you want, whatever. So it was probably rushed, but a lot of people then appropriate that and say, yes, our device is FDA approved. So that's bad. And then as Glenn was pointing out, the ozone, so the UL, the California Air Resources Board and EPA all have these, test methods and regulations for ozone. But it sounds a lot better if you don't say, we don't make ozone or whatever. You just simply say, we're approved by EPA.
Well, yeah, that sounds a lot better. And you mentioned the FTC. It's like, was the FTC ever that effective? I mean, we go back to the 90s now, to the days of the ozone machines all over the place, and that one company in particular got fined and cited, and they were right back under a different brand name, not long after, selling the same darn product to the industry, right?
Yeah. Well, the reason I bring it up is because when I was a scientist at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, we were studying radon progeny, right? The decay products of radon, and we're looking at air cleaning devices, how well they worked on that. And in the course of that work, we found out a lot of these little air cleaning devices really didn't do anything. They were basically, as Glenn put it, fragrance dispensers. They had a citrus pad on them or something. And the Federal Trade Commission did step in. I got hired as a consultant for them. And so there was some action there. And the good thing that came out of it was the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers said, maybe we should hire Offermann here. He's working with the Federal Trade Commission that's going to regulate us. Maybe we should regulate ourselves, in which they did. So I helped them come up with that AHAM AC1 chamber test, which was really pioneered by a professor at the university. I'm going to get his name because I did it on the other show. Ken Whitby. Thank you, Ken Whitby, for showing how you can test the efficacy of an air cleaner, which doesn't maybe have a defined in and out. You can put it in a chamber with it, test the decay of the particles without the device on, test it with the device on, and you get the clean air delivery rate. So we're going to move, I think there's the Federal Trade Commission is going to have their attention brought to this. What's yet to remain is to see what enforcement will happen. A lot of these claims are a little on the gray area.
Yes.
They use the word 99.9% a lot. But I think how we normally do this with the FTC is with focus groups in that. And if your advertisements tell the focus group, hey, I don't need a mask. I don't need social distancing. I just have to put this thing in 99% out of the way. The Federal Trade Commission is not going to, or shouldn't, stand for that, and they should be, reeled in then. So,
I mean, hopefully that will be the case. I want to remind our virtual studio audience, and we have a large one here today, that we will be going into a Q&A mode in about 9 minutes at the 1:30 Eastern mark. I would ask that you would post your questions up in the chat box for us. Our moderator, Susan Valenti, the editor of Healthy Indoors magazine, you can chat back and forth with her, and she'll queue up the questions that we can get on air today. I know we're going to be limited because we have a half-hour window, but we're also planning on doing an overtime. We'll end the show officially at 2 p.m., but we're going to do a little bit of an overtime segment with the show today. So that should be good. This is, I believe the Q&A is going to get great. Yeah, I mean, it's challenging though, because again, we have, and the three of you, our three guests here today, you represent different sectors. Bud, obviously you've been a researcher too, but I'm viewing you as a consultant at this juncture. Glenn, obviously in an academia and a researcher, and Tom, you're a practitioner, you're out in the field. And so it's three different perspectives on how we're looking at things. But what's a consumer to do? Because where's the consumer getting their information? Is that research work that people like you, Glenn, are doing getting distilled down to the practitioner level, and even more importantly, into a form that general consumers can understand?
I'd say that the broad right now, what's being generated in research isn't getting distilled to the practitioner because it's not the time. It takes time for the research to sort of come together and ultimately provide good recommendations that are consistent. But that said, a lot of the work that was done by Bud and others in the 80s and 90s are definitely part of the recommendations that you see coming out of different sectors, ASHRAE or whatever. So it does happen, it just happens slowly, and a lot of what gets done isn't really necessary. So for example, a lot of what I do is chemistry. We don't really need to have the details of all of that chemistry in the lap of a practitioner, but what we should have is some way of translating what that chemistry means to the practitioner, and that's hard because we don't know. It's very complicated. We don't know what the toxicity of the impacts of one thing or another. We know some, but we don't know enough to be able to make really strong recommendations, other than the quite simple ones, which are: don't add reactive species into indoor environments. Don't encourage chemistry. That's something we could say.
But a lot of the technology that's being offered in the industry, to consumers, right, that's coming from the indoor air quality industry, do just that, right?
It is. It's a bad analogy, but it's like you got a parking lot full of old cars. You want to get rid of them. You can either go in there with a tow truck and pull one out at a time, and that's filtration, or you can go in there with a hand grenade and throw it around for a while, and that's adding OH radicals. So what you now have is a parking lot full of shrapnel. So it's just not a good idea to induce chemistry or add any kind of extra chemistry into indoor environments, because you end up with indiscriminate chemistry making things that you don't want.
Yeah,
Sure, exactly.
Bob, I think that was a real good question. So why are people buying these? Why are the school districts, which is my real concern, the kids, the teachers, how are they getting hooked into these devices? And I get it in a way. They're under a lot of pressure to get back to school.
Well, what I see too is there's a perception show going on too. Is that right. They're under a lot of pressure, but they're under a lot of pressure because the parents are saying, how come you haven't had a third-party contractor clean this, what have you? So from a practitioner's point of view, there was an onslaught of business coming to us, whether the practitioners acted in a practical and scientific or ethical manner or not. The business was, we need to get this done, and if you don't want to do it, we'll hire somebody else to do it, and somebody else will do it, or install those types of filtration units. Give me what I want, and it's tough. So
you're right. So the message is getting out, Bob. Okay, so academia papers aren't going to do it. Marwa's open letter, which is going to school districts, that'll help. We just had one in, this is the Sacramento Bee, an article. Sacramento Unified School District spent $6.2 million on a UV PCO device that really didn't do that much. And I got reached out by a parent in the school district, and was also a reporter and at Kaiser Health News. And so I drilled down into their data, showed that it didn't do much. And thank goodness that $6.2 million contract got canceled.
Yeah.
And that $6.2 million can now go to stuff that can really make an impact, right? Regular HEPA portable filters, air filters, MERV 13 filters, things like that.
I mean, that's the problem. But the American Recovery Act, by nature, right, is kind of speeding up the process and forcing schools to make, perhaps knee-jerk reactions for these things. Correct?
Right. So this message, it's got to get out to the school board. It's got to be a one-pager. Marwa's letter is a little long, but you need a one-pager to the school districts, but then to the funding people, the feds, and then also, and we have $2 billion here in California, AB 8401, to give schools money. Well, let's get it on the record that the money is not going to unproven air cleaning technology. It's only going to proven, trusted technology that's either rated by ASHRAE MERV or AHAM CADR ratings. I mean, that's it.
I mean, but herein lies the dilemma that the directive information really, you mentioned FTC and, really, I mean, the CDC, EPA, everybody, all these cognizant authorities and regulative authorities have somewhat almost been missing in action on some of the recommendation stuff, right? I mean, especially for schools, right? It's a difficult situation for them to be able to, where are they getting the info from? Like
it's a very
I saw in the
difficult
commentary,
situation.
somebody's asking, well, what shouldn't the school board do their due diligence? From where?
Yeah, they cannot. They cannot. I've reached down and drilled in. How did this decision make? How did this decision happen? And they're under a lot of pressure to put another layer of protection on, and then so they're ripe for the sell, and then the sell comes, like put in these ionizers or whatever. So, but ideally they would reach out to some consultants like myself or other people for some advice. But it's hard for the school districts to do it. They're really
it's tough. It's tough if there isn't a single, or some single, cognizant authorities they can lean on to. Tom, you had a point?
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, there was a company out of Texas that did a disinfection of the whole school district and offered a product that had over 90 days, said they had 90 days of efficacy for the said virus, when the product that they applied has zero efficacy for viruses. It's an antimicrobial, but it's an antimicrobial for algae, fungus, and those are organosilines. And we all know, if you're familiar with the chemical, it's privately labeled by with a whole bunch of different manufacturers or said manufacturers that borrow the same EPA registration. So we have that fraud going on out there, and even people that are claiming long-term efficacy of these types of products for viruses it's borderline fraud.
Well, long-term efficacy, again, is for microbiologicals, right? There typically has to be some form of toxicity, or
right.
I know there's some that claim that they do a static charge and break cell walls and that sort of thing, and
yeah, that's the
non-toxic.
that's the organosilane.
And again, some of those products I think are. I think the problem with general consumers is they think in terms of bacteria, fungi, and viruses all is the same. Like
right.
they're germs.
Exactly. They classify everything underneath one label.
Yeah, but the other thing is that the SARS-CoV-2, because that's big to talk about now. That
Sure.
variant's really small. And it's in a respiratory droplet, which might be pretty small, might be 3, 4, 5 microns, but the virions are much, much smaller. So when they come out and then they dry almost instantly, you're left with salts and proteins and encasing these virions. So they don't most of the virions don't have contact with whatever you put in the air, ions, hydroxyl radicals, whatever. So that's another problem with this. A HEPA filter, which is
take it out.
And I think, Glenn, you mentioned, we talked yesterday, and you mentioned that there's might be some psychological appeal to killing the virus,
Yeah.
just catching it.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, I mean, this is all of this gets tied up ultimately in psychology. But what is snake oil, right? You sell because people, you rely on the psychology of people's need for something, fear of something. In this case, destroying the virus is a lot more appealing than just capturing it and having it sitting there on a filter in your child's school in an HVAC system until the filter gets replaced. That is a little bit hard. It's hard to explain why that is better, to somebody.
The only
How do you
thing
validate it?
with HEPA filters that put UV in, you're like, well, what's the point, right? You already caught it. What do you have to kill it for? The only thing I could come up with a client that was selling UV devices was, well, maybe for the person that changes the filter out, you've irradiate, you're really not supposed to irradiate filter media with UV light anyway.
Potentially break it down. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, that was just a brainstorm of people trying to find a home for UV back, years ago, where most of the patent rights had been sold off for water. And then can we do something in air with, UV? Then the UV PCO devices came out, and
So we're at the point, we're slightly past the midpoint here. Today's going to be flying on us. So we're going to ask that the studio audience turn on your cameras now. We'll get the whole Brady Bunch review going. And Kevin Hunter, you're going to be our first live question. So make sure you get your camera on, and we'll get you unmuted so you'll be able to speak to us. All right. All right, Kevin, you're up.
Yeah.
What's your question?
So I had a question about making modifications to HVAC systems, and if you would recommend, over complete system overhaul or any ERV or HRV systems for providing fresh air ventilation.
Well, if you're in my climate zone in California, ERV, HRV doesn't really make a lot of sense because it's not such a hot or cold climate. But in other places, I mean, it's an energy saving way of doing ventilation, right? But we're big on ventilation, big on MERV 13 filters, big on portable filters with HEPA, not so big on electrostatics, ionizers, and
What about, so do you think that for a home, if they have a 1-inch filter, they should increase their slot to a 4-inch or 5-inch?
I'm a professional mechanical engineer, and a lot of the pushback from schools, because I've been working mainly, that's been my interest, is to try to get the kids back and the teachers safely in the schools. So the pushback was, because we're saying, look, a MERV 13 filter is about 85% effective on airborne SARS-CoV-2. And you can put it in most air handlers if you have a 2-inch slot. So the pleated filters, as I think Glenn was saying, they become a commodity. They were invented, back in the 50s for controlling nuclear stuff, right? And so they're 100% effective. And how do you distinguish yourself in the market? Because anyone can make these HEPA filters. There's no patent on it. And so, yes, I agree. Put in, if the problem with the residential, though, is that you're normally not running your HVAC fan all the time. Average about 2 hours, maybe a day for a lot of climate zones. And then you could run it all the time, but that's an awfully big fan. So be prepared for the $200 a month electric bill, on top of it. But you could put in a MERV 13 with a low pressure drop, but you need at least a 2-inch slot. 4-inch even better.
Cool.
I mean, that also raises the question, for a residential environment, does it make more sense to be looking at portable HEPA filtration units, putting them in the areas of, longer occupancy, like bedrooms, things like that? Or, is that whole house filtration a reasonable approach?
I think a combination of the two.
For the high-end clients we have, they got the bazillion-dollar homes. I mean, they're going HEPA whole whole house filtration. But
Right,
that's
but
the
you've got
exception, right?
static pressure. You've got a static pressure design on a mechanical system that's not typical residential system to be able to do
Yeah,
that.
so that is Bob, that's a good point. You can do portables. And the other thing we haven't talked about here though is, I know COVID-19 is the big subject now, but out here in California, we got wildfires. And
Yeah.
then that's a tough act to balance for a school, let's say. You really don't want to bring any air in, right? Because of the wildfire smoke, but you do want to bring it in for the SARS-CoV-2. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. Basically, our recommendations are don't turn off the outdoor air in a wildfire smoke, but keep it at a minimum.
Well, and your California wildfires, I mean, that's kind of, going to be a similar situation, with the outdoor particulate levels to what they deal with in places in Asia, in India,
Right.
where, they have PM 2.5 counts that are just totally off the hook. And, adding outside air, with the theory that it's fresh air, it's not, and it's not going to solve any
Yeah,
problems.
you wouldn't want to turn it off. But most, I don't know if the audience knows, but some of them will. Most ventilation systems have economizers on them that can vary the amount of outdoor air, right, depending on the outdoor temperature. Well, you want to have a kill switch. If you're in a wildfire smoke, you want to have a kill switch for that economizer so that it just stays in the minimum. But we do want to have some outside air coming into the building. But then you have a good filter too, a MERV 13 or better.
What about a carbon filter?
Yeah, carbon, the carbon filters, you really, to like where we have success with them, airports, sewage treatment plants, where the outdoor air is clearly unacceptable. But then we're talking a 2-inch bed, right, of activated charcoal. So the type of carbon filters you see being sold are oftentimes just a little bit of dust impregnated on some fabric or whatever.
Right.
And at any rate, they're only a capacitor. I don't know, Glenn, you can chime in, but it doesn't permanently remove it. It just kind of holds it up until it gets saturated and then it starts coming off again.
Yeah, I think this activated carbon question is a good question, not necessarily at the individual consumer level, but from a public health perspective, it is cost effective globally for us to deploy activated carbon as a way to remove ozone and ozone reaction products from buildings. Yep. If you look at the epidemiology and you go through all the details, it is worth improving indoor air quality with activated carbon as a sort of national benefit because it will reduce mortality and morbidity. And it saved money basically on hospitalization.
Yeah, one of the things that we use for when we deploy ionized hydrogen peroxide for disinfection of room space is that we have an AFD in that space with carbon cartridges, and we scrub the room free, down to below 1 ppm, and before we allow for occupancy.
Yeah,
so,
you're gonna scrub a lot of it with just your HEPA filter.
Yeah,
ozone.
absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you could put the carbon in, but yeah.
So our next question, Jeffrey has one. I don't see your camera on, but Jeffrey, are you still with us?
How about if I unmute myself? So we should be good. Really wasn't a question, was more like an observation on that K-12 and maybe to a lesser degree higher ed market. I was privy to a conversation, if you will, group meeting a couple of weeks ago in New York State. And I would say in a K-12 atmosphere, not unsimilar to what we're looking at here, as you said, like the Brady Bunch. The meeting went on for a couple hours, if not a little bit longer. And they had already had their pre-selected questions. And it was pretty much a question and answer type of thing rather than an info dump. So 80%, I would guess, at a minimal number the questions were, okay, who's responsible? AKA, who can I sue if my kid gets sick?
Yep.
Okay. It's as simple as that. And that followed up with customers that I've spoken with or end users that said, look, dude, I don't want to spend any money, but I got to open up because I don't want to seem negligent. I'll just leave
Yeah,
it.
well, in San Francisco, the mayor, London Breed, sued the school district for basically stalling on getting back to school. I mean, no one, I get it too. If I was a teacher in a school, I'd be nervous too, not with no vaccination. So, but there wasn't really any movement on to get back to schools until the lawsuit happened. And this was the mayor suing the school district. And then the very next day, they had a plan. And we're starting school next week.
Yeah, one of the things that is always concerned from a contractor's point of view is that when you're installing anything, piece of equipment, what have you, you have to sell it as a mitigation tool, and it's not necessarily going to, never use the word sterilization, eradicate anything like that along those lines, because that's just going to get you in trouble. And there are, even with vaccines, there's only a certain amount of efficacy per vaccine. They're not always perfect. And it's the same thing with applying a remedy to any situation. Even if it's used as, it's going to make everybody feel better if we do this. But in a lot of cases, I do agree with Glenn. Adding chemicals or something to any room environment, the liability falls back on the person that's doing the application.
Well, clearly, yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, people, you raised this earlier, Tom, especially on the early stages of COVID, when it was, really, a lot of mass fear going on, and people wanted to see something happening, especially in places like schools and public places. So, I could see where there was a rush to do something, spray something, blow something in here, bring some technology in to combat this deadly menace, and are we always going to be open to that with this industry? Because the thing is, we've had these conversations before. This is the first worldwide big pandemic of this scale that we've had in our lifetimes. But there have been smaller pandemics, and there have been issues and crises. Well, it seems like we always had the same discussion.
I'll give you an example. I forget the name of the airline right now, but it was a third-party labeled chemical that was an organosilane, quaternary amine. Same thing as any of the that puts the charge particle on a surface, and once the microorganism hits the surface, it impales a cell wall and basically electrocutes it on contact. And it's a great product for what it's originally designed for. But they went as far as to get emergency use authorization to deploy this, and not only that, but they're using electrostatic sprayers to do it. What is in the air after that? You know what I mean? To me, unless the label is the law. So if you're deploying any chemical to do disinfection, what have you, if it doesn't say approved for fogging, approved for electrostatic spraying or anything on that label, the liability for applying that goes back to the person doing the application.
Sure. Per FIFRA. Yeah. It really is the label.
Well, but in all of your cities, you probably all have some kind of product warning labels, the little warnings that are warning. No one in the state of California. So for us, it's Prop 65. So things are like reproductive toxicants or cancer-causing compounds, and your product either has it in it or creates it above a certain amount, you have to put that label on it. And for instance, the e-cigarette people, right? I think one of the most popular fluids for transporting the nicotine and flavorants is propylene glycol. And when you heat up propylene glycol, it breaks down and oxidizes, and you start creating formaldehyde. And that's the last thing the e-cigarette people wanted to put on their label. Yeah, warning, causes cancer. And so there are laws out there. There's the Federal Trade Commission. There is the labeling laws. But this thing all happened so quick, right? So to get it direct.
Right. But now we're seeing, the quote unquote claims for misapplication of antimicrobial pesticide. And it's getting to the point where, have we done more harm than good? Everybody was running out to, every contractor was out there running to Home Depot, buying electrostatic sprayers and, spraying God knows what through them.
Yeah.
To make a quick buck. And we saw this, during, enterovirus and H1N1, the MRSA scare. That's the whole thing, is that,
But who's responsible for that? Don't the consumers, and when I say consumers in this case, schools and like commercial or residential consumers, don't they kind of drive these actions by is chicken or egg situation? I know the contractors should know better, but
they are at Bob, they are driving the need, and when there's a need, there's always snake oil that's going to be in our marketplace. It's a free market, and the consumer. How much of the liability goes on to the consumer because the consumer is not educated or doesn't take the time to educate themselves on what they're asking for?
Yeah. Tony, you're going to be the next question, but I just want to direct this same question back to Glenn too, because with your editorial back a few years ago in Indoor Air, you raised a lot of thoughts of how you can, how can the industry educate people, and you were proposing, really professionals that are in the know need to share with their sphere of influence, right?
Yeah, I was making the point really to educators, my colleagues in the universities or otherwise, that we need to think more about getting these critical thinking skills into the classroom on a regular basis. We teach about theory, we teach about, we even have labs, we talk about a lot of things, but we don't necessarily introduce critical thinking and sort of healthy skepticism in that process of learning, because we think, that's something they should learn outside this environment. But instead, it's something they're not getting. And so, in my classroom, I actually have students select devices, test claims, give me a report, tell me whether their claims are met, tell me things like that. And with the idea that maybe they will take this out there and continue to have a healthy skepticism about products, about their own work, and thinking inwardly, right? Am I doing a good job? And so yeah, sorry, I don't want to make it too long.
So I've always said that too. I've been a consultant and a contractor for 34 years now, which is hard to imagine. And that was always my mantra too. Is like always, just because we do something a certain way or this is the way everybody says to do it, critically take a look at what you're doing, your processes, right? Because everything that you're in indoor environmental aspects, right? If you're being contracted to be a consultant or a contractor, the bottom line is health, right? It's the occupant health. That's what's driving all this. That's all. Sure, it's liability, but all these things go back to health. So if any part of your process that you're going to employ to deal with some menace, has some ramifications that, adversely affect health, then I think you're doing it wrong. Clearly. Tony, you're up next.
Thanks, Bob and team. This has been great. Just a quick question. You hear the word HEPA quite a bit. And, one, are all HEPAs alike? And then two, you hear the words like HEPA-like or true HEPA or light HEPA or certified HEPA, registered HEPA, certified. You hear all these different words and the prices vary quite a bit. So just wanted to pose that question to maybe Bob and Glenn and Bud and the team and see what their thoughts are. Thank you.
Well, I'll chime in. There definitely the word HEPA has been appropriated. Yeah. So a true HEPA will have a HEPA certification test, 99.97%. But really what you want to make, and Glenn, I'm reaching back to our conversation yesterday about ozone. The analogy here I'm going to make is we were talking about, 50 ppb creation of ozone by an air cleaner, the standard. Really what you want to know is the emission rate, right? of ozone. Yeah. And the same thing here. It's not so, you want to know the clean air delivery rate. So which is the product of the air flowing through the device and its efficiency. So if it's a HEPA filter and you got 300 CFM going through the device, you have 300 CFM of air cleaning power. And as an indoor environmental engineer, that's what you want. That's what I need to calculate for my client what kind of improvement they're going to get in the air. Not whether it's a HEPA or near HEPA or whatever. But what is the clean air delivery rate? The ASHRAE MERV rating is really just an efficacy rating. But you can multiply the CFM through the device time its efficacy rating. And as I was saying, for MERV 13 is about 85% on airborne SARS-CoV-2. So pretty good, and be able to put it into pretty much all equipment that has a 2-inch slot of air.
Well, I mean, there's another issue to raise here too with the certified HEPA filters. Almost all the equipment that you're seeing out, I shouldn't say almost all, but a good portion of the equipment you see out there is HEPA vacuum cleaners, HEPA negative air machines,
Right.
HEPA air filtration units. Certified HEPA filters now, mind you. Okay, ones that actually would pass the DOP test. They're still not certifying the appliance. They're certified, even most of these certified filters still are, not certifying that cabinet. So that AFD you have, just because you have a certified HEPA filter in it, doesn't mean that appliance is actually delivering HEPA.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we were working on big mold jobs where there's lots of AFDs involved, I mean, we want to see that certification very current on each AFD, right? Tom, right? So, yeah, right, because
and by the certification, by that, are you saying that they're actually DOP testing the appliances?
Yeah.
You're seeing that done in the U.S.? Because other than the province of Ontario, I haven't seen too many people doing that.
Yeah, we insist on it on all our projects. And if we get in there, there's an AFD with, without a current, within a few months certification, actually tested, because the filter fit into the device. Then the job gets paused.
Yeah, you're seeing that a lot more in healthcare jobs or areas or facilities where there's specialty environments where we're doing a HEPA test on AFDs or other types of in some of our cases ULPA certification may be necessary.
And it's pretty simple to do now because you have all these inexpensive particle counters or not.
Well, that's not certifying it though, Bud, right? Unless you're doing a particle generator and a photometer.
No, you don't need it. You don't need any.
You're saying laser. You're okay with somebody spot checking with laser.
Laser, yes.
Hand. Yeah, and that's what we've been doing too for literally 30 years. We've used handheld laser counters in the field and always looked at inlet outlet on the machine, right. And we're thumbnailing it. If it's about 90, you're getting about 99% reduction at 0.3.
Yeah, exactly. It's and in fact, that's exactly what the certifiers are doing too. They're not challenging it with DOP or anything like that. They're just using the ambient particles. There's bazillion of them in the air. You just measure upstream and downstream. So yeah.
So, I mean, back to that original question I posed, in our byline for this show. You always hear that that snake oil thing. But is the issue technology, or is the issue the people using the technology in the field, or is it both? And what do you guys think? I mean, we still haven't answered that question. I'm not sure that we will.
I think it falls back on the applicator, Bob, myself, and because at the end of the day, the people that are doing the application are always going to be holding the cards, because any manufacturer will. I'll give you an instance, going back to the chemical end of things, where you have a common product that's out there today that claims, 24 hours of efficacy, but they're very careful in their advertisement to say, for bacteria, they're on the front end, they're claiming COVID deactivation, but on the back end of their advertisement, has efficacy for bacteria up to 24 hours, and it's kind of like a bait and switch thing to me, just be careful, folks. Research your products, research them well, ask an indoor air quality professional, of their opinion, and maybe get a second opinion before you go and spend that atrocious amount of money installing anything.
But I mean, but that raises the issue, Tom, ask a professional, but what if the professional is either, misguided or, unscrupulous, and I
don't think we're going to get out of that.
Yeah, I firmly believe that we need to have government step in a little bit here at the Fed level or even at the state level, and list devices that are vetted out to be,
fraudulent
devices that, and to call out the devices that, aren't vetted out, because the consumer, homeowner, school district, they don't know. And then they don't even know who to call. And, some environmental person or whatever. And then they go on the website and they say, oh, well, it looks like it. Yeah, that looks like a good thing to do. So I think it's a little bit of work to do, but that would be a very valuable resource to actually name names. These we approve, these we don't approve of.
It was interesting. A couple weeks back, David Krause and Rich Corsi were on our show, and they both raised that same issue. It's like, and I don't disagree with it. I think we actually need a heavier hand on some of this stuff, because in other countries, in the EU, things are a little bit tighter regulated. You're not going to see these product issues.
Well, that's I don't know. In Europe, because we have I have colleagues in Europe over there on the chemical end. They are not nearly as stringent on, they don't have a registration process or what have you. And they're not nearly as stringent on the misinformation or advertisement on the chemical end. And that's one of their frustrations. It's like, you guys have the EPA, everything has to be registered as an antimicrobial pesticide, or the process has to be registered. Over in Europe, we just don't have that consensus among all the countries to have one standard. And so that's a problem. It's one of the things that was brought up to me is that, can it be done through a third-party nonprofit? Like Good Housekeeping has the seal of approval. And could it be, do we have to rely on government to do this? And like I said, can it be a third-party nonprofit that the industry supports?
I don't care who it is. It just needs to be done. I'm fine with the government doing it. I'm fine with Good Housekeeping magazine doing it, whatever.
But you understand what I mean. You understand what I mean. Yeah.
But it does need to happen, I think, because the problem is it's crazy Wild West buyer beware here now.
Yes. Right.
So we have time for one more question in our regular time segment. Margie, you're going to have the last question on the show proper for today.
All right. Thank you. This has been really informative. I'm a college educator, teach for Boston Architectural College, and I teach on materials and indoor environmental quality.
Nice.
Thank you. The students are already pretty confused about all the resources I give them and third-party certifications on building materials. I'm just asking what would be the best resource to share with them regarding ventilation and HEPA filtration and certifications on air filtration systems.
Well, the ASHRAE's got some guidance documents out that's pretty good. EPA has some guidance documents put out. Bob, I'm going to send you Marwa's open letter, the EPA guidance document, the ASHRAE guidance document. These all have good information, and I'm glad you're getting the kids involved in indoor air quality. I know Glenn's been doing labs where he actually has his students, test some of these air cleaners and stuff. So it's great that we're educating the next group.
Absolutely. There's a gentleman too out of Harvard that wrote a book, Healthy Buildings, Dr. Joe Allen. I don't know.
Oh yeah. He's been pretty active on the COVID front. So I've been following him. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. So we're at the top of the hour, and so we're done with our regular show per se. However, the guests have agreed to stay on for a little bit of overtime, which we do periodically here on the Healthy Indoors Show. So we're going to do that. We're going to ask that the studio audience now kills their cameras. We're just going to you can definitely pose questions in chat, and we'll try to entertain those.